We'll look at building a hat for our puppet character now. Similar methods to the way we built the character. So we'll start with a cube. I'll just move it out of the way so it's not totally underneath our character. And we'll try using a couple of different tools, maybe just to show you some variation. I'll put a subdivision around the bottom here, but instead of using the history subdivision like I did before, which can cause problems. You can only add those subdivisions when an object's in its kind of original form. If you start to manipulate an object at a component level, it will kind of screw up with the history. So we'll use something called the multi-cut tool, which lives up here. It's like the little scale port, also lives in your modeling toolkit, and this is really good. You can either just draw edges on, and you can see the little red dot means it's going to merge with that vertex there. But if you hold the control key, it creates edge loops. So that we can put an edge loop in around there and just click with the left mouse button and it puts it in there. You can also use the shift key to snap to the middle of edges, and shift and control will snap in increments along, so that you can see it's just snapping along. So there's a few variations using the control and shift key. Play about with them, get used to it. Once you've added that edge loop in there, press the Q key just to cancel and go back into selection mode. Then I'm going to pick these faces here. You can usually double click and it will select all of them, but look, just make sure let me just make sure I've got them all selected correctly, nothing else, and I'm going to extrude those. So I'll click on the extrude button here, and if I drag them out, you can see it's made a very, very simple hat. Okay, but we want to make this a little bit more detailed than this, so we'll add another edge loop to this. So we use the multi-cut tool again, hold the control key down, and I'll hold shift as well, so we snap this dead center like so, and then click the left mouse button and release everything. Press Q again to cancel selection, and then I'll go down into my top view, go into vertex mode, and we'll do a little bit of scaling. Let's pick those and we'll scale those out. Make sure you're picking through objects again, like so. So let's have a look at it in this view. We need to make the brim of the hat a little bit thinner. So can you see I sort of line up the perspective view so that I can pick the verts and get the ones behind. So get used to sort of lining up the views so you can see exactly what you're doing. So I'm going to do that. I'm then I'll try pulling the brim of the hat down a bit, this bit here. Give it a bit of an angle. We'll give it that little sort of saggy bit in the top of the hat like that. And again, you can play about for ages shaping this. So look, I'm just going to drag those points there, using the scale again, maybe slightly like that. So you can just play about with this until you've got the shape you want. You could put another edge loop in across here if you wanted to. So using the multi-cut tool again, Control Shift, I could put another edge loop in there, and it allows us to sculpt this even more. So we can round the hat off even more if we want to, like so. And again, with these points here, just carefully just picking them, like so. And you can see which ones I'm pulling just to scale. So I'm only scaling in one axis, so I'm not getting it too confused. And we've kind of made, a simple kind of hat shape, and you can play about with that and sculpt that even more if you want to. We'll then put it on his head. So if I go back into object mode, so I'm going to press the F8 key. We can see the pivot point of the hat is in the middle of the what do you call that bit of the hat? The top bit of the hat. I've no idea. I'm not much of an expert on hats. So I want to move that pivot point down so it's about here, so I can sort of rotate the hat around nicely when it's on his head. So I press the insert key, it takes me into pivot mode. I can move the pivot of the object down to about there, and then press the insert key and it takes me out of that. If you're using an Apple Mac, I don't think they have an insert key, so you have to hold the D key down. You just hold the D key down and that takes you into pivot mode, release it, it takes you out. Then we can move this up onto his head and we can scale it and make it the correct size, because at the moment it's a rather large hat. So I've bung that on his head like so, and then we can scale it down. So we can scale it that way, scale it that way, scale it that way, and you can customize it. You can see his head sort of poking through a bit, so we need to just adjust that, and you can fiddle about with it, move the verts about and so on until you've got it how you want. And we can rotate it and kind of give him a bit of personality with how the hat sort of sits on his head and so on. You can see that these verts here are poking through, so I'd have to just muck about with that. I can pick these vertices here, that one, and that one, and see this little square box? This will only move it in the Z and the Y axis, so that I can just move those about slightly until hopefully there's no sort of intersection between the different faces and stuff like that. And you can give it, give it a bit of personality. Like I said, you're best to sort of leave these things kind of fairly symmetrical and add this kind of personality to it once you've got a rig inside it. So you're probably best to leave the hat flat and very neutral, and then once you've got the rig inside it, you can then use the bones to control how the hat looks. But I'll give it a bit of personality for now. So he kind of looks like this. Okay, so you've got two separate objects in your scene. You've got the hat and the actual character. If we have a look over at your channel box over here, so it's this little tab here, we can see we have a lot of what's called construction history. So every input that's gone into the making of this is built up as construction history. For the most part, you get rid of construction history. It just eventually will start to slow Maya down, especially with incredibly complex scenes. You want to get rid of it. There are occasions when you keep the history, and that's when it comes to rigging. You want to keep the history between a skeleton and the polygon shape. That relationship you want to keep. All of this stuff we delete. You can get rid of that by going into Edit, Delete by Type, and History. Okay, and you can see the hotkey there is a bit of a big one. It's Alt Shift and D, but it's worth getting used to. Okay, so if I pick this in object mode, it needs to be in object mode, and I hold Alt Shift D, you can see it deletes all that construction history, and it's really worth doing that every so often. Okay, it can cause a few little issues, history can. It can cause a few conflicts. If anything's ever going wrong with your model, get rid of the history, it might help it out. But like I said, be wary. There is a few bits of history that you want to keep, especially with rigging and deformation tools and stuff like that. You can see there's a little bit of history on the hat. Again, Alt Shift D, I get rid of it. It's a nice clean model. The last thing I might want to do, you can see it's got some sort of stats in here to do with the translation, the scaling, and that. You can freeze all that and zero it all, so you can go to modify and freeze transformations. It zeroes everything and sets the scale back to 1. It kind of cleans up the object. I would be reluctant to do it with this one because I've sort of wobbled this around and moved it and stuff like that. I might be tempted to put this back sort of straight on his head, then freeze the rotations, and then kind of do it. So look, if I go to his rotations here, and you can type in values here. If I type in a 0 here, look, it's just put his hat back to here. Then I might go modify, freeze transformations, let's set everything back to 0. And then if I want to rotate it and stuff like that, I can do that. But you can see all the scales and that, and the translations are all nicely zeroed. What's good about freezing transformations is if you move something away, like if I move this over here and I rotate it and stuff like that, if I go back to this and I just shift select the things I want to reset and just press 0, that it puts it back to where I froze it. Okay, it's a good way of sort of kind of resetting objects and stuff like that. Okay, we're going to add a few more subdivisions to him because eventually we're going to have a skeleton inside him, and that skeleton wants to deform the mesh. So we do need subdivisions because the skeleton can only deform where there are vertices, edges, etc. on a model. So look here, it can deform it here because there's edges here. But if we didn't have edges there, there was no shape here, but it was just a dead straight arm. All the skeleton could do was move the hand about. It wouldn't be able to bend the elbow. Okay, so you do need subdivisions. We're going to put a few in his body, and we'll put a couple around the elbows and that. It might be a chance to show you a couple of other new tools in Maya 2018. Tools that I'm not particularly familiar with, so I might muck about with them a bit and get them wrong, but I'll give it a go. So we're going to the modeling toolkit. We'll use the multi-cut tool, and I'm going to deliberately put these in the wrong place. So I'm going to hold control down, I'm going to put one there and maybe one there. Okay, I want to move these, and there's a new feature in Maya called the slide tool. See if I can remember how to use it. If I go into edge mode, I double click on this. Double clicking will select the whole edge loop if it's nice and clean. Sometimes it won't if you've got a non-quad, a non-four-sided face anywhere around it, but these are all quads, four-sided, so it all works nicely. And then I want to move this up. Normally if I move it up, you can see it's affecting the shape of the model, but there's a new feature called slide, and if I hold Control and Shift, that's it, Control and Shift, look, it slides it up and down and it keeps the original shape, so you can move things about without upsetting the original shape. So I go down to this one, double click on it, hold Control Shift, and look, you can see slide appears on the screen, and I can move that into place. It's quite a nice new feature. And I'm going to do the same for the arms, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn on symmetry. I get on okay with symmetry. I still find a few things a bit glitchy with it, but it can be quite good. You do have to have your model quite symmetrical in the first place for it to work successfully, but it's over here. My object, look, I want to do symmetry across the x-axis, which is across sort of his arm span. So I'll turn on the symmetry across the x, so object x. We hope it works. We're going to multi-cut, and I'll put that you can see it's doing the same on the other side. Okay, so I'm going to put a couple of things around here, so it means when his elbow bends, the whole arm won't just collapse. It will help it keep its shape. Same with the wrist, and I might put one just here. Shoulders are always a problem when you start to deform them with shoulder joints and stuff like that. And you can see the symmetry works quite nicely across there. You do sometimes get a few glitches, but there are some options about how you do the symmetry, whether it's across the world axis, whether it's based on the topology where you have to choose a center line on your object and stuff like that. I'm going to turn it off again when I've finished, and I'll press the Q key to come out of the multi-cut tool and just back to normal like so. So I kind of think he is finished. I'll press F8 to go back, and we'll have a look at the hat. The hat is okay. I'll show you a few other bits and pieces you can do. Like I said, I would keep your model simple, but if we wanted to give him like items of clothing and stuff like that, it's very easy to do. Look, you can pick like these edges here. I've not got symmetry on, and we can scale them up a little bit. We scale them up in the up axis, sorry, and in the cross axis. It makes it look like he's got like sleeves on his jumper and stuff like that. If we put another edge loop in here, say for example, and then if I pick that edge and I scale it up, we can make him look like he's got sort of kind of like a jumper on or something. You know, you can start to get shape and form to your characters quite quickly. So it's quite a nice way of working. Just putting edge loops in and start sculpting. But with this model, like I've said a few times now, keep it simple, because if the more complex you make it, it will make it harder to, well, just more complex to put textures on, and more complex when it comes to the rigging. So hopefully you'll have your basic polygon character now. Oh, just the last thing, obviously, make sure you save it. I've done absolutely no saving throughout this, and that's not good. You should always just be saving every so often. So save scene as, and save a few versions of it in case Maya decides to crash as you're saving and takes your file out with it. So that's the sort of footnote on this tutorial, is always make sure you're saving as you go along. Okay,